Welcome to this Newsnight special debate. Tonight we're tackling the eternal conundrum, what women want. It's preoccupied men for centuries, but now it's a crucial element for both camps in the independence referendum. Hello, good evening. Women, it seems, are less engaged than men in the deliberations running up to the independence referendum. Meanwhile, polling has consistently shown that those who express an opinion are less likely to vote for independence than men. Well, tonight we have an audience composed exclusively of women, some of whom are firmly in one camp or the other, and the rest who have yet to make up their minds. They've all submitted questions to our expert panel, also an all-female zone, and they are. Firstly, we have Kainde Mianje, is a researcher at Glasgow University and campaigner on issues including the gender pay gap. She's a committed unionist and member of the Better Together group. Next to her is the actress Elaine C. Smith. Elaine is well known in her professional life and increasingly for her stance as an advocate for independence. Amanda Harvey runs her own consultancy and is former chief executive of the financial services industry body Scottish Financial Enterprise. She's a champion of the pro-unionist cause. And finally, former diplomat and special advisor to Jack McConnell, Jean Freeman. Jean is a key member of the campaigning Women for Independence group. Now, before we open up the floor, let's return to the idea of an independence gender gap and how crucial a factor it is. Now, recent polls consistently show more men answer yes to the question, should Scotland be an independent country, than women. So let's assess the increasing voting significance of, I'd estimate, just over half of you watching this now.
Look, women are irrational, that's all there is to that. Their heads are full of cotton hay and rags. They're nothing but exasperating, irritating, vacillating, calculating, agitating, maddening and infuriating hags.
If only Emmeline knew what she started. The women's vote has been described as the most formidable obstacle standing between the Yes campaign and its dream of an independent Scotland. But is there such a thing?
No, men and women vote in much the same way as each other in Britain, but there are some differences at the margins that can make a difference because we're talking about 52% of the population being women, so even some small differences between men can have an impact. But where the differences seem to come, women say health and education are more important than men do. Men are more often likely to say the economy, Europe, and so if those are the issues that become salient at an election, then gender can start to be important.
Women are increasingly a political force to be wooed. In UK general elections over the last half-century, the number of women voters has risen steadily, so that they now outnumber or are at least neck and neck with men. The situation in Scotland is similar. In the 2003 Scottish elections, for example, more women voted than men. But where there is huge diversity among women about why they make their voting choice, studies show there is a degree of female collectiveness in one area, and that is a fear of the political unknown. It's a situation that manifests itself in the closest thing Scotland has to a comparable independence debate, the campaign for Quebec to gain independence from Canada. In 1980, the result from the 8 million or so voters was an overwhelming no. In 1995, the No campaign won by just over 1 percentage point, and women voters were pivotal.
There's two main views. One is that women are more likely to be in caring roles, looking after children, looking after older relatives, and that puts them in contact with government services, and so any possible problems with those services that can affect them much more than it would male voters. So there's that view, and then there's the view that women are overrepresented in other groups that are much less likely to support constitutional change. So people with lower incomes, people with lower levels of education, working class women. So the gender gap is much smaller for middle class men and middle class women than it is for working class women and working class men. Working class women are much less likely to support constitutional change than working class men.
But if that sort of thing is keeping the Yes campaign chiefs awake at night, hope lies in the fact that it may be early days in the deliberations of the female psyche.
Well, I think women's voting is going to be absolutely crucial, because I imagine that the story we see at the general election level will also play out, that women will probably make their minds up a bit later on. They're certainly less often members of the SNP, or at least less often supporters of the SNP, so they're going to be amongst that group who are going to be more persuadable. So it depends how the campaign firms up, but swaying women one way or the other, persuading them that perhaps it's not so much of a risk, or making them concerned about the uncertainty, could really swing it one way or the other.
Well, a range of interesting points raised there, but above all, reaffirmation of the importance of engaging more than 50% of the population. Well, let's do just that and go to our first question from our audience, and it comes from Amy Garden.
Why does the panel think fewer women should support independence than men? Let's go to Jean first. Jean, you're a part of Women for Independence, but it seems that at this stage your message isn't getting through.
Well, I'm not so sure that's true, actually. I think women are more undecided, and they will take their time to listen to all the information and think about the arguments. And what I'd say to the majority of women who are thinking about this very important decision is to think about it on the basis of choice. This is about the kind of Scotland that we want and where we think the best chances of achieving that country lie. I don't think that lies by continuing to be part of a union which is imposing sanctions and difficulties and increased poverty on our children, difficulties for our women, than the government of Scotland would do. So I think that women want all the information that they can get, they want to hear the arguments, and they will engage. They're engaging now, more and more of them will do so the closer we get to that important date in 2014.
But it has to be said, the polls show that among women who have made up their minds, they are not supporting independence in huge numbers.
Well, I'm not sure about the huge numbers, Jackie, to be fair. What I think is happening, and there was some recent information in today's press, that as women and young people who were undecided, more of them are moving towards supporting independence.
Well, can I interrupt you on this, because I was hoping that you would bring that up, because this was an article, I don't know how many of you saw that, that said that more women and young people were beginning to support independence. We called the Yes campaign because, as you can imagine, we were very interested in such a poll. We wanted details on that, and they said it was private polling. They couldn't even tell us who carried it out. So no names, no pack drill, and yet we're expected to swallow it.
Well, every side of this debate will conduct private polling. Political parties do it for every election. Everybody does it. I mean, goodness sake, Tesco probably does private polling, and they won't release that information to you. It informs how they construct their argument and what they do. I know no more about it than what I read in the paper this morning. But what I do know from the meetings that I do and the women that I talk to is that women are undecided. They are taking their time. They're perfectly right to do so and entitled to do so. They need people like me to persuade them, or indeed Amanda from the other side to put her argument, and to have that discussion. But more of them are moving towards supporting independence than they were a wee while ago.
Well, I think it's quite fair just to give viewers and our audience the background to the reports in the newspapers that you raised. Amanda, could it just be that women take more time to make up their minds?
I think that in this situation there are so many fundamental questions that have got to be asked and answered. And at the moment, we haven't got all of the answers to really give us comfort that an independent Scotland would be the way to go. Now, I personally have thought deeply about these matters, and I'm convinced that the direction would be a wrong one. And when I speak to colleagues, and many of them are women in business, they're looking not just at the issues affecting Scotland, but they're thinking about what they're going to do to grow their companies in the future. They're thinking about how they're going to succeed in entering markets around the world, because we live in a global economy and it's highly competitive. So rightly, there are a number of very important questions that need to be asked. And the risks involved in taking this fundamental step and divorcing ourselves from the rest of the UK, from our biggest single market, are fundamental. They affect our working lives, they affect the support that we have should we require welfare support, they affect our generations to come. It's a major issue, and I'm glad that women are taking time to think, and I'm very glad the polls are showing what they are at the moment.
Elaine, how are you going to win over the crucial number, and it is crucial for the Yes campaign, of women voters?
I think generally in the walk of life I'm in and where I live in the East End of Glasgow and all that, I see that women are interested, they are engaged, but I think in general we have to see that women are more reticent and they want to take their time about how they make a decision. In many ways, you know, in the work I've done in zero tolerance and in domestic violence over 25 years, we have often seen when, even in the worst of situations, women take a long, long time to leave, to move, to decide to go on with a different part of their life. And I certainly, even in my own politics, it's taken me many, many years to get to this position of yes. I have considered, I have felt the fear, I have felt the anger. To say that I have, you know, any one of us has just woken up one day and said, oh, I'm voting yes. It takes a long, long time to get there and to get through the arguments. There has been, we don't have one newspaper in Scotland supporting the Yes campaign. We have, so that tsunami of negativity that has been thrown at us all for a long time to scare us makes women more reticent. It is also interesting that some of the research done into the banking crisis, for instance, has said that women, had they been involved on 50% of the boards that took us towards the financial crash, had women been involved in those boards, we would not have taken the decisions that those banks did, or we would be less likely to take those decisions. Because generally women are risk averse. We're more risk averse than men. We see the downside, we feel the fear, we think about our kids, we think about health. And I do also think that there is a reticence in women at this point. The debate is a male debate. It's about men in suits, generally arguing with each other. It's not engaging. Look where we are in Scotland. We live in a country where less than 20% of our judges and our lawyers are women, where there's never been a woman-headed BBC, no woman editor, one woman editor in my lifetime of a newspaper in Scotland. We don't see ourselves reflected back. If we don't see ourselves reflected back, how are we supposed to get to a point of feeling that we are independent if we don't really know who we are?
What about the Quebec question, or the Quebec experience, which was absolutely fascinating, where they found that women, especially working class women, who had a relationship with the state, with welfare, were the most risk averse?
I can understand that, because they are I'm a businesswoman, but I live in the East End of Glasgow, a very working class area. I can see that reticence. They talk to me about it. A lot of my audience are as well, because they're the ones at the sharp end. They're the ones that are going to be looking after the elderly parents. They're care workers. They're on low pay. Those are the women that I am actually interested in. The people like Amanda, who are wonderful women doing a great job in Scotland, and they have been successful. They're wealthy. They have great careers. They go out there. They've probably went to the best private schools. Their children go to the best private schools. Of course, they're going to vote no.
So independence is a class issue?
I think to a certain extent, in lots of ways, it is
very interesting. Well, I'm sure that's that's a very interesting point. It's something I'm sure we can come back to. Is it possible, Candy, if I can ask you, that also referring to the Quebec question, there was a certain amount of feeling within the campaign, the No campaign, that they had the women's vote in their pocket. They became complacent, and in the second referendum, they nearly lost it because of that. Isn't there a danger that that could happen to the Better Together campaign, the way the polls are standing in the moment?
I don't think there is, because I think we take this issue very seriously. As a grassroots activist within Better Together, I've spoken to a large number of women who are really engaging within our campaign at a very grassroots level. And they have been telling me in the conversations that I have had that there is a real fear about there's been a consistent squeeze on living standards. There are people who are losing jobs. We're living in extremely tough economic times. And I think there is a natural concern that we are stepping into the unknown. I would, as someone who has campaigned equally on the issue of violence against women, be slightly concerned about the illusion that you draw there, Elaine, towards making the decision about the constitutional future and making that comparison with deciding to leave an abusive relationship, because I think that's a slightly worrying slightly worrying thing to draw there. I think women have very serious concerns that do need to be met. Legitimate concerns that do need to be met. And I think the step into the dark that independence represents.
Aren't you scaring them by saying a step into the dark? It's
well,
very evocative.
The thing is, we don't know. We don't know what will happen.
The union, exactly. We don't know with the union what is going to happen. What we do know is the cuts are going to get worse, and the working class women at the heart of that are going to be affected more than anyone else in this country by the cuts that are about to come from Westminster.
And they don't have any guarantee. And they don't have any, and I mean, I speak to this, you don't have the majority on speaking to working class women.
Of course I don't.
I've spoken to very, very many women who have suffered extremely hardly under the cuts. Through my own research, I've spoken to women who are really suffering for what this government is doing. But what I would say to them, and what I do say to them, is the solution is not to vote yes in the independence referendum when you don't know. We don't know what the economic circumstances of Scotland are going to be. What you should do is in the 2015 general election is vote for change then. And don't just do that within Scotland, but do that across the UK.
Jackie, I have to say, I mean, that's a good argument until you get to the point about where would change come from in that 2015 general election.
Amanda, where would change come from? Because you were advocating much the same.
Labour government, then you've not been listening to what Ed Balls is saying, you've not been listening to what Miliband has been saying. They are going to continue what this current government is doing. So there is no hope there. The hope is in making the decisions for ourselves about our own families, our own children, and taking that into our own hands. That's where hope lies.
Amanda.
Two very important points for me that are coming out of the discussion so far. The first thing is we shouldn't descend to party politics here. The issue that we're all facing next September is whether we want to break away from the United Kingdom or not. We cannot at this stage know what party might be elected to Westminster, or indeed, were Scotland to vote for independence, what party would be elected to the Scottish Government. This is unknown territory. The other dangerous thing, I think, is to somehow suggest that this debate is being governed by scaremongering, or somehow there is a polarity of what the interests of the Scottish people are. It doesn't matter what class of society you come from. Everybody has an interest in ensuring that Scotland prospers. We need opportunity for everybody. I'm interested in what will make Scotland strong for the future.
All right.
So I would like to keep to these high-level issues because they unite us all.
Thank you very much. We have a lot of ground to cover. Let's go to the lady at the back in the red blouse.
We hear a lot from the Better Together campaign about how uncertain it is if we vote for independence, but nothing ever stays the same. And I'm not hearing any certainty about if we don't vote for it. I'm not hearing any vision about what their view is for Scotland's place within the UK. All I'm hearing is, oh, don't do that because it's really scary. But they're not telling me what they're going to do if we do stay within the UK.
Amanda, do you think that's valid?
I think that your question reflects what public debate is focused on at the moment, because there is such a deficit of questions, answers rather, to the questions that people want answers to. My view is that this is not about a negative vision for the future or being frightened about the future. My concern personally is what is going to be best for Scotland and how it can continue to thrive and be the very best, most successful country it can be. And if we all share an ambitious vision for Scotland's future, the question is, how can we best deliver that? What is the most solid, stable platform that we can ensure Scotland has to build on its successes and prosper in the future? And Better Together, as I understand the focus of debate just now, is concentrating on that very concern. Do we want to pull the rug away and cut ourselves off from our main domestic market, which is what independence would mean? Do we want to create a question mark over Scotland's competitiveness for international companies that are looking at investing for the long term? Do we want to put a border between ourselves
Amanda,
and England?
sorry, lots of
These
questions
are all
there.
questions.
Well put.
But I'm ambitious for the future. That's the key thing I want to get across.
Let me go back to the audience. The lady in the purple top in the middle.
Hi, I'm going to come back to what Kayende was saying about the fear and the dark places that we're going into. I think that there's maybe been, in some way, we've been excluded as women from politics, and most times women especially, haven't felt that politics have been a part of their lives. So it's time now to bring people into the fold and do away with that fear instead of encouraging it.
All right, well, let's do just that and get another question now. And it comes from Laura Burnett.
I don't yet feel I can make an informed decision on independence. When am I going to get all the facts on things such as EU membership, currency and defence?
Well, before we answer that one, and although there is an open invitation to debates like this, many in our audience apply because they have an affiliation to the Yes or to the Better Together campaigns. The difficulty is always how to reach women who aren't already politically committed. So I went out onto the streets of Glasgow to find them, and this is what was on their minds.
I don't know about our bus pass and things like that, you know, and the pensions. So,
is it a case of fear of the unknown for you?
Yes, I think so.
Do you know anything about it?
No.
Do you know when it's happening? The vote on Scotland's future? Whether or not Scotland becomes an independent country?
Nope.
So what should they be doing to firstly capture your attention?
Stop playing politics and tell the people ideally what it entails for us. Definitely for us.
And what are the issues which will determine how you vote?
Financial issues are a really big issue, I think. I don't want to end up what happened in Ireland. I don't want us to have a really big slump, but I do feel that we'd probably be better off independently, financially better off.
I feel Britain needs to be joined together. We're getting more and more individual, and we've got more strength in numbers. I just don't feel Scotland on its own can stand up for itself.
Do you think as voters women are more cautious?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I look into a lot more. My husband is a cautious voter, but I think I look into more fine detail than he probably does.
I don't take anything to do it, that's that.
So you won't be voting next year?
As a woman, I do feel like I don't know anything about it, so I would go with what maybe like my boyfriend said and my dad said, like something
really?
like that.
In 21st century Scotland?
I know, that's terrible, I'm so old-fashioned.
So, okay, if someone was to educate you, for want of a better word, about what the sides are actually offering, how best would they do it that would capture your attention?
I just want to know exactly what's going to happen, what the change is going to be.
Well, there were gasps in the studio from that last, the views of that last contributor, but she was being honest. The views of some women in Glasgow, is that representative of the population as a whole? Is the problem information, as Laura's question suggested? Well, before I take it to the panel, let's see what our audience here thinks tonight. Is there enough specific information about the consequences of independence or the alternatives? Who thinks there is? Not many. Who thinks there isn't? Pretty overwhelming. Elaine, is there a feeling that this debate, although it's early days, it should move away from the constitutional minutiae that we've had so far into the big issues that matter to people living their lives?
I think the big issues obviously are hugely important, but I think we also have to say to the audience, how do you get your information? How do you get your information about politics? Where do women get it? And if you have not one newspaper in the country supporting the Yes campaign, or even putting out the information that Yes would like to get out there, or even the Scottish Government would like to get out there on, I'm not a member of the party or anything like that, but how do you get that information out to people? I understand completely. I have two daughters who say exactly the same to me. I'm not hearing it, it's not getting to me. You're talking about it here, but we're not. I think we also have to look at, I mean, I found that quite depressing, listening to women talk, but it's where a lot of women are, you know. If we still live in a country where a lot of women can't be members of certain golf clubs, where you can't play bowls unless it's a Tuesday and Thursday between the hours of 4 and 6, you know, or you get into trouble about doing that, where there's a sort of self-policing and small conservatism amongst women as well, where they gather, a woman who is outspoken and goes out there and says what she thinks within a lot of working class communities can be censored in many ways, that she's seen as being a bit too lippy and a bit too much to say for herself. And that doesn't exist in the same way amongst middle class women. But I do think that we really have to think about, if we want that information, then we have to demand it from our broadcasters and from our newspapers and from all those places to let us know and not only give one side. I mean, it feels to me as if there has been the negativity that has come. And if you're a don't know, I don't know. I mean, there's a no camp and a yes camp. They've already made up their mind. But like you, if you're in the middle and you want those questions answered, all you're getting, it feels to be like a squib thrown up the close, you know. Here, work that out. And it scares and terrifies people. And there isn't a platform for those answers to come to you.
Chianti, let me ask you about information from the Better Together group about the various forms of devolution that might follow a vote, a no vote.
Well, I mean, I think that there's an awful lot of information out there. It isn't just the broadcast media, but I think people have been asking questions, and instead of being presented with honest answers, they've been accused of scaremongering whenever they ask difficult questions. And I do think that that's quite dishonest, and I think that does a huge disservice to the democratic process that's supposed to be taking place.
Okay, no, what we're going to do to the audience is the woman in the front row with your hand raised in the long hair.
Yeah. I've moved from London to join the Radical Independence campaign because I don't want to be part of a state anymore that goes to wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'd really like to know, like, what the Better Together campaign says about foreign policy, and actually what the Yes campaign is going to say about their vision for how to make Scotland a more progressive state in the world, so that we live in a more peaceful world.
All right, let's stay with the audience. And there's a lady with your hand raised and the glasses. Yes.
I think there's quite straightforwardly a question that all the interested parties have to address, which is, what difference will your preferred constitutional option make for women? What are you going to do about equal pay, about childcare, about gender-based violence? We're starting to hear some of that tonight, but we're also hearing quite a lot about making women the problem, rather than the fact that the debate is not speaking to women.
Let's move to the other side again, the young lady in the front row.
So firstly, you suggest that we should be getting our information from the news channels and newspapers, but actually I think we should be getting our information from the party that's the proponent of the independence campaign, and this white paper is not supposed to be published until the autumn. So I think that women have a perfect... Well, anybody has a right to be reticent until then. And secondly, I think, Elaine, you focused a lot on inequalities between women, and we don't feel represented in politics, we don't feel represented in high-up positions in the media, but I don't see how this will change in an independent Scotland. Has the campaign addressed that?
Okay, and let's get a couple of questions, related questions from the audience. We're going to Erin Hardy for her question. Erin.
Women are still vastly underrepresented in politics, even in Holyrood today. So do you think independence could give a better platform for women to become involved in politics?
So question number one, but also go to Jackie Barton. Jackie?
Only 20% of businesses in Scotland are owned by women. Would that figure increase with independence or sticking to the status quo?
So, Amanda, first, you're a businesswoman advocating the status quo. The gender balance, it's not there.
Okay, I'm going to deal with the question about businesses owned by women and run by women in Scotland. Would that change if we had constitutional change? And my view is that Potentially it could, but in the wrong direction, because I think that if we do have independence in Scotland, the competitiveness of Scotland for business investment is going to be vastly reduced. And therefore, it will affect, potentially in the long term, business start-up owned by men and women. I don't think the constitutional setup makes a difference, though, to the number of women involved in starting and running businesses. I've been a champion for women's interests in business for a long time, some 25 years, and I believe that in Scotland we are behind the curve and more people can get involved.
Jean, you're raising your eyebrows to that.
It's a separate issue constitutionally.
I just don't think that's true, to be frank. I mean, I think that independence can increase the number of women who are involved in starting up their own businesses. And the reason for that, give us a sec, Amanda, I'm getting to it. The reason for that is quite simply because we can choose what we do with tax. So we could, for example, use a tax income to invest more in startups. We could use it to reduce VAT in certain areas. We could use it to reduce or do away with air passenger duty. We would have the choice about what we would do. So the choices that we would have would be about choices that fit the Scottish economy. What we have at the minute are economic choices about the UK as a whole, which don't fit the Scottish economy and actually play most to London and the South East. And the other question that you asked, hold on a sec, the other question that was asked was about equality and women being more involved. One of the things that we will have, if we have an independent Scotland, is a written constitution. And in that written constitution, we can write, you see, this isn't a debate about party politics. This is our debate. I'm not in a political party. This is our debate. We can write into that constitution, we can lobby for it, we can argue for it, to have the constitutional right, for example, to equal pay, to a living wage, to proper
before I get
childcare.
a
It's up to us,
response
and the
from
choice
that,
is there with independence.
Before I get a response from that from Kende, who wants to come in there, what about we go back to the audience, the lady with her hand raised?
I actually work for a business support organisation which is funded by the Scottish Funding Council and the ERDF, the European Regional Development Fund. I'd have to lend my support to Amanda and say that I have major concerns about what support there would be for start-up businesses in Scotland if that funding were to disappear, if we were not a member of the EU, which at the moment there seems to be very little certainty about, and the information that I've seen leads me to believe that we would have to go through the membership process. Can the panel answer what the financial situation would be for business support in Scotland for any other programmes the ERDF fund?
Before we go to the panel, what about the lady in black on in the second row?
As a businesswoman for the last 13 years, I was happy to get help at the start-up of my business, but also desperately unhappy when starting up a new business to find that there would be absolutely no help and no funding whatsoever. I look to this more, though, as an issue of the right to self-determination, and I feel that whether or not funding is there, whether or not there is support there, I feel that the Scottish people and me, we have the right to determine what happens, and at the moment we don't have a democracy.
Candy first.
I'd like to come in on the issue of political representation. I don't think that you can write political representation into the Constitution in the way that you're planning. We already have the Equal Pay Act. We've had the Equal Pay Act for over 40 years. We have equality within the United Kingdom. Emmeline Pankhurst campaigned for women's equality and the right to vote 100 years ago, but we still don't have equality of representation. We know that it takes a lot more than having things written on paper to achieve equality of representation for women. And there is only one party in Scotland that has taken those steps, and that's the party that I'm extremely proud to be a member of. And I'm not ashamed of saying that I am a member of the Labour Party. And when the Scottish Parliament was created, we took a real effort, we made a real effort to make sure that representation of women was absolutely up there. And we came really close. We had the highest level of representation of women across Europe. Now, very sadly, that has fallen back over the last several years. And in fact, the party that is leading this independence debate has a woeful record when it comes to representation of women and on women's issues. I mean, Alex Salmond has only just realised, when the polling numbers were looking poor for him, that there was an issue with childcare in this country. So I think what we need to be talking about is the real issues that affect women in this country, and having real action
let's get a response
to have equality.
To that from Elaine.
Well, I just don't think we should get into that tribal stuff. I think women get tired of it. I think when you get to, oh, I'm just going to say what my party does about my party, we can all trade those sort of insults. We can all trade those sort of things. I think that's what turns many people away from politics. On the European thing as well, although there is uncertainty, and you can say there is uncertainty around where the Scottish Government and our negotiation to get into the European Union, there is even more uncertainty with an in-out referendum. I mean, it could very well be in a couple of years, but it doesn't matter how the Scots feel about Europe. We'll be out of Europe anyway, because the South East of England is going to vote that way.
Amanda, very briefly, if you would, on this issue.
A point of clarification. We've discussed economic development policy. It's important to stress that that is currently devolved to Scotland, and we are able to decide how our strategies and policies are evolved to support business startup. That is there. The key issue, though, is the funding pot that will be available to fuel that in the future, and what will create the most money to spend on these things.
OK. To the audience again, our next question. We're going to bring in a couple of audience members with related questions about finances from very different points of view. Firstly, Alana Cochrane.
Hi. As a working mum of 2 young children, I would like, can the panel tell me what would happen to tax credits, childcare costs and other important benefits in an independent Scotland?
OK, and to Claire Hewhan.
Supporters of independence talk about a fairer Scotland, but they seem to think that this can only be achieved through a large state. What can the independence campaign offer to people who do not want a tax and spend Scotland?
Jean, I think it's fair to say that the Yes Scotland vision seems to be for a large public sector and generous welfare benefits. Who's going to pay for this?
No, I'm not sure I agree that that is fair. You see, the thing we've got to get our heads around is the first decision we make is whether or not we want to have independence. If we choose independence, we will then be choosing the kind of government we want. And a lot of the issues that people are talking about will be down to that second choice about do you vote for which party do you vote for and what is in their manifestos. I think what the Yes Scotland campaign, though, is doing is pointing out that the current situation that working mothers, others with children, older people, people with disabilities are currently facing, where they have the bedroom tax, they have the household benefit cap, where we're going to have 50,000 more children in Scotland in poverty by 2020, that those choices that this current government are making do not have to be like that in Scotland. And you know, we are the 8th wealthiest country in the rich world. The 8th wealthiest, Scotland is. But we're part of the UK, which is the 4th most unequal country in the world. So it's not about whether or not we can afford this. It's about what choices do we make about how we use our income, how do we support our citizens, how do we encourage economic prosperity and growth, and those choices only really come to us if we vote for independence.
Gandhi, if you're advocating the status quo, does that mean that you're happy with the situation as it is, with the austerity at the moment, with some of the benefit cuts?
No, I'm absolutely not happy with the situation at the moment. I think that I'm fully in favour of having a large state that provides for its citizens. I don't think that having independence is the only way to achieve that. And what I would say is that the people who are suffering in Scotland as a result of the benefit changes and the welfare cuts are experiencing exactly the same challenges as people who are living just across the border or who are living further south. Now, what I would like to see is a fairer United Kingdom, a more equal United Kingdom, a United Kingdom where we genuinely pool risk, where we genuinely provide for the most vulnerable people within society. But I believe that we should be doing that for the entire country. And I think it would be terrible. It would be terrible for the north of England to be abandoned by Scotland when it's at the most vulnerable stage of these welfare reforms. I think that would be a real tragedy.
The lady in the second back row in the blue.
I kind of listen sympathetically to Kehinde's points, and I would love to believe, as she does, in a UK and a Westminster government that could actually represent fairly the population of the country, but it doesn't. We've outright rejected electoral reform, and we're heading towards hung parliament after hung parliament after hung parliament. We are in coalition in Westminster, and they hate it there. We've worked in coalition in Scotland for a great deal of years now, and we do it quite well. Why would we not want to jettison a Westminster who are clearly completely against electoral reform and clearly can't work together in a cross-partisan way?
The lady in black with her hand raised.
At the moment, as you say, people who are being affected by the welfare reform implementation are some of the most vulnerable Scottish people, people with disabilities, for example. Is going independent not an opportunity to start to undo some of those decisions and actually move forwards and be the Scottish culture that we all are, where we look after our own?
And the lady, just before we get back, let's get another voice. Yes, the young lady in the second row in pink.
Talk about a written constitution, and you say that at that point we'll be able to make the decisions about what kind of Scotland will be. But who is going to write that constitution? Aren't the people that the SNP, for instance, that are in power now, be able to make those negotiations before we actually even have a vote on who we're going to have in power? So how are we going to actually influence those?
Just factually on that, no, the SNP and the Yes campaign is not just about the SNP. No. There are many other parties involved, and people like myself and Elaine in no party. But they are not going to write the constitution. They are not going to make the decisions about policies on welfare benefits or whatever unless they win the election in 2016. What they're going to do between 2014 and 2016 is negotiate with the UK government to get those powers back on tax, on benefits, and on a range of other issues. So they'll be negotiating on our behalf, but they won't be making decisions about the kind of policies that we'll then have, because that's up to all of us. And the written constitution, do you know, my personal view of that is we should start writing it. Yeah. We should start writing it, we should start lobbying it. As women, we have lots of views, lots of ideas, lots of opinions. Why don't we start doing that now? Amanda. And then saying to the parties, that's the constitution we want, guys. Okay.
Amanda. We're hearing this evening about a number of aspirations in the audience and frustration about current policy, be it UK-level policy or Scottish policy. We had a question particularly about the size of the state and the weighting of the public sector in Scotland. The fundamental thing is that to move Scotland forward in an aspirational direction and to address all of these things, you need money. You need infrastructure, you need funding. Questions in any economy have to be made about how budgets are going to be spent, how they're going to be prioritised. Tough choices have to be made. But if we don't have a solid budget with solid infrastructure behind us in Scotland, if we're not able to afford to look after our sick, our ageing population, to provide opportunities for the future, none of these things can be realised. Now, I support the aims of Better Together. I don't speak for them, nor do I speak for a political party. I'm a businesswoman. I operate from Scotland around the world. I've spent 25 years championing Scotland's interests. I want Scotland to succeed, but we've got to have a strong foundation. And it's lunacy to think that we can simply cut ourselves off and be able to spend for the future. We won't have the funding and we won't have the infrastructure. Investment will go. It's not the way forward.
Our audience again, the lady with the striped dress.
I was involved with a very, very highly prestigious financial institution for a number of years. And it was my job to ask people to give us their money to invest on their behalf. And we were told from day one of our training, on pain of instant dismissal, that you can never, ever project a potential return. You can only talk about past performance. And I would suggest to you that yes, it would be lovely if we could sit here and say everybody's house will be filled with gold and we will live in a land of milk and honey. That would be great if we could say that. We can't. What we can do is look at the past performance of what has been inflicted on Scotland by Westminster and say, is this what we want for our children? And I certainly don't want it for my grandchildren. And with the best will in the world, if you honestly think that Ed Balls, Ed Miliband, Joanne Lamont, genuinely, honestly are going to have a road to Damascus experience and turn round and
I think you've made your first
they're
point.
Going to do, you're self-delusional.
Thank you very much. That was a point well made. We've just got time for one more question, and it comes from Isabel Campbell.
Would women benefit more from independence or staying with the current arrangements?
In a nutshell, Candy.
I think that women would benefit much more from staying with the current arrangements, because currently we have the best of both worlds. We have a strong Scottish Parliament in Holyrood that decides on important issues that affect all of us, and we also have the opportunity to vote for a new government at Westminster in 2015. That's a democracy for
So
you.
we have the best of both worlds. Elaine C. Smith, what's not to like?
I would obviously, as I've stated, believe that women will have more opportunities. If we have the levers of power to do and write our constitution and decide on the policies in Scotland, then I believe in my heart and my head that the opportunities for women and the lives of women will increase and be better. I have a lot of sympathy for what you've been saying. I come from that persuasion as well of left Labour from many years ago. I don't think the women of Scotland or the people of Scotland believe it anymore, that the corrupt institutions of the British state will actually deliver to those who need it the best and the most in Scotland. A more jam or maybe jam in a couple of years isn't good enough anymore.
Elaine,
we have a chance to make it different.
Thank you. Amanda.
Scotland is in a fantastic position. It's doing very well in many areas. It's got a tremendous platform in which to build. That situation has been created by being part of the United Kingdom over some 300 years. It's the best platform for future growth. That's what's going to provide opportunity to women.
And Jean, briefly, if you would.
Almost Amanda made my case there. The fact of the matter is, the reason why Scotland is prosperous, is doing well and has a great platform to build on, is because Scots have done that and the people who live in Scotland have done that. If we can do that as part of a union that does not represent us anymore, how much more can we do if we have the power in our own hands?
Thank you very much. Well, sadly, we have run out of time. Thank you to our panel and to our studio audience. We'll be examining the independence issues on another Newsnight Scotland special in the summer. But Gordon's back at the usual time tomorrow with Newsnight. From all of us here, good night.